Hi there everyone, today I'm reviewing The End and the Death, Volume 2 by Dan Abnett. So I've just finished reading The End and the Death, and this is going to be a spoiler-filled review, so there's your warning. Click off now if you don't want spoilers. So this is a bit of a marathon audiobook. My hard copy's been delayed a week by Amazon, so hopefully that's not affecting too many people. But essentially, The End and the Death, the final book in the Horus Heresy Siege of Terror, has been split into 3 volumes. Originally supposed to be 2, I believe. But it kind of feels like this was a bit of a mistake with this book. So let's start there and with why that is. This book's really symptomatic of some of the long-running issues I have with Warhammer book editing. So let's start with these bad points. There seems to be little distinction between the necessary prose and story and plot development of the book. That's not to say I don't expect a small interlude about a human kind of running through all the chaos of the Horus Heresy, where there's superhuman warriors shooting superheated suns at each other, or world eaters just eviscerating their enemy as he runs past. But even those kind of encounters could take place as a key character's plot and story development, or have some kind of purpose. Like, why is that occurring? What are his thoughts and beliefs, and how do they influence how he acts? Between the key characters and plot development, there are these constant distractions, and they don't really seem to have any purpose. And I say this as a huge Dan Abnett fan. In the audiobook especially, you seem to jump point of view almost every single chapter, and some of the chapters are only a few paragraphs long. And also, when the audiobook clocks in at over 18 hours, this soon becomes tedious. It wouldn't be so bad if we were able to catch up with some of the characters in the series that we haven't seen for a while. For example, imagine if some of the scenes were to revisit key figures from the series that we haven't really heard from in a while, although admittedly a lot of them are probably dead, but whom we kind of catch up with in Events on Terror, and there's these little interesting diversions that say, oh, look what happened to this person. At least it would have more of a sense of gravitas or import to know their kind of endings and how things ended up for them. But I think Horus Heresy as a whole suffers from that problem. It's always felt quite disjointed because of the number of authors working on the book and the number of different threads and legions that are getting focused on. Nevertheless, this book is good, actually. And to talk about what happens, yes, Sanguinius dies, which personally was a relief, not because I dislike Sanguinius, it's kind of the opposite, actually. But I was really concerned they would retcon what had happened. And the end fight is written really well. Sanguinius is bludgeoned as, and I quote, a disobedient dog in quite a brutal way. It's fitting and memorable, even quite sad for one so noble. But you really get a sense of Horus's arrogance and disdain when some of this fight is written from his perspective. So that section was really good. I was fearful too when Ferrus Manus seemed like he was coming back to life, but instead he kind of appears as like an avatar of his spirit. It's not really him, but it kind of is him. Maybe not him in physical form, but representative of what he would say and do if he was still around. And this book does a good job then of not tearing up the established lore, but ever so slightly straddling the line between what's happened and, sort of modifying and making it interesting. So in terms of the Events on Terror, time has frozen due to the meeting of material and immaterial. So events get quite jumbled. We kind of have the figure of Chaos, obviously the Chaos gods and their kind of peons, and the Emperor obviously representing order. So things are all coming to a cataclysmic clash. And Ahriman kind of explains this, an open quote, the thing begun will still occur, but the result will still be different, end quote. And he kind of explains this quite well. History's been set, but the events have made time misaligned on Terror, so there is room for change. And I guess this was to give Dan Abnett some license to change things without retconning everything. And it's kind of handled quite well, actually. Old Person and John Grammaticus find out that they have to retrace their steps to ensure that the earlier versions of themselves find their way to where they end up, which is sort of talking through someone to the Emperor. And it's kind of a mind-melting paradox that actually didn't feel out of place. We finally start seeing Old Person and John Grammaticus' arc come to an end, finally. One which I've been quite critical of over the series. Their role is to convince the Emperor to not utilise the forces of chaos in his final battle, which originally he kind of intends because he fears he's not strong enough to beat Horus and Chaos. But by doing so, he'd actually become something even more terrible, a true god himself, if he reneged on his policy of rationality and distancing himself from emotion, which is what the Warp and Chaos prey on. So it's a bit of a trap to entice him to become, perhaps another worse god even than the Chaos gods, perhaps, if such a thing is possible. I personally liked this approach to the lore again. It provided a twist, and it has been kind of speculated by fans that the Emperor is the Dark King that we've seen mentioned over the course of the series. But it didn't really retcon what has happened as well. So it's quite good for, everyone knows what's going to happen in the events of the Horus Heresy, but it kind of creates an interesting twist again, like we saw with Sanguinius or even Ferris, I guess. And it provides good reason for the presence and importance of Ol and John, which, to my mind, throughout the series has just been a bit too vague. Like, obviously, it's been delved in with John's relations with Xenos, for example, but I didn't get a sense that you really care for these characters much over the course of the series. But at least here, they actually matter and provide interesting perspective, and their discussions with the Emperor are really good. The strange thing about this book, then, is that it has so much content, and yet it often feels shallow. Aside from some of the key plot points that I've just mentioned, which for sure are deep and resounding enough, it feels like some of the minor fights are just there and don't really matter. And also there's many loose ends from Volume 1 that aren't really tied up, but which do appear. And so, in other words, not much really happens with them in this book. For example, we have Basilio Foe, Ahriman searching for a book, the encounter with Corswain and the Dark Angels against the Death Guard, Guilliman and the Retribution Fleet, nothing really happens. Valdor encountering Abaddon is kind of teed up, but nothing actually develops there, really. And that's the thing with Volume 2. The crucial events are going to happen in the next volume, the final volume, hopefully. And I suspect that's going to be a better, more engaging book than this one. And I just hope it devotes adequate time to the key events. For sure, in Volume 2, some of the events did have plenty of time devoted to them. But there's also these events where nothing really happened and they didn't need to be there. They're just seemingly spurious and non-important. So it makes it quite unbalanced because you've got some areas where the book is strong. I like how it handled a lot of the lore. But then there's some parts where you're just like, why is this here? Fortunately, throughout, Abnett's writing is still great. He's just a veteran of good writing, I would say. And it is truly complemented by Jonathan Keeble's reading of the audiobook, especially through the action sequences where he kind of rapidly increases the pace of his reading and it really builds up tension. And here's an example of that, and I open quote. "Open them," Ralderon yells to Furio and his Terminators. "How long since their lord passed through them? 5 minutes? 10? An hour? Time has lost its form entirely. It feels to Ikasati that they have been fighting in this bloody chamber for the whole of his life. An endless purgatory of carnage. How long has Sanguinius been cut off and alone?" End quote. That's from Part 8, Chapter 16, fragments of the audiobook. So in terms of final score, The End and the Death Volume 2 is not a perfect book. The repeated refrains of different characters of the title is cringy. They keep saying the end and the death. There's plenty of extraneous scenes that aren't needed and you kind of wonder why they're there. Some philosophical sections vacillate between bemusing or interesting. But certain scenes really do capture the magic of Warhammer and the Horus Heresy. Abaddon blaming Erebus as the latter tells him that actually Abaddon was partly at fault for what's happened. He was complicit. Time shifting and distorting everything. Vulcan and Malkador sort of sacrificing and being resolute for the Emperor. The Perpetuals finally figuring out what is going on along with the reader. And of course the epic encounter of Sanguinius and Horus. It's not perfect, and it probably will be the weakest of the 3 volumes, I would predict, but you'll still want to read it. So I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. It's really an unbalanced book, and it was quite tricky to review, but there are some great moments in it, and I think although there's bloat, there's those great moments which really do sort of drive it home and make you want to keep reading. So I'll be reviewing the third and final instalment when it finally gets here, as well as a load of Warhammer books. So like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.